Are you ready to make the most of your oil and gas mineral rights? Welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. Get the knowledge and resources you need to manage your minerals and royalties. Here is your host, Matt Sands.
Hello and welcome to the Mineral Rights Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sands, and I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Williams, and we're here to help you make the most of your minerals and royalties. And in this episode, we're going to talk about our favorite tools for managing your minerals and royalties in 2025. And, these essential tools that we're going to talk about, Justin, this just kind of scratches the surface. But for somebody just getting started, I know for me, being an engineer and kind of a nerd, I'm like, okay, what tools or shortcuts or what things can I use in whatever it is that I'm researching? And so I always go down that rabbit hole pretty deeply at the beginning. So hopefully this will save people some time and give you the shortcut to figure out, okay, I need to have these essential tools. And we'll try to break these down in terms of maybe the more basic versus the more experienced or complex. And a lot of these things, I will say, will come in at certain times. And Justin, I know before we hit record, you were talking about some of the times when you had a specific need, you would use a specific tool to address that need. So don't worry, we're going to go through this laundry list of things, but you don't need to really know about them until you're in the weeds doing that particular thing. And we'll talk about what those things are that you need to know how to do as a mineral and royalty owner. So what did you think, Justin, as we were talking and preparing for this show, as far as sort of the things that, most mineral and royalty owners need to have and to know how to use?
You hit the nail on the head with these kind of are broken up by section, and they come up at different times. If you're trying to answer a question for the operator, you may be using a certain section of these or only pieces and parts of these. But Matt, we've experienced with people learning, they kind of go through phases. You handle whatever questions on the table, but then you might wonder what else could be out there if you don't know. And so these tools kind of run the gamut, but don't be afraid. So if you're somebody starting out, don't be overwhelmed by the amount of tools and resources we list here. It'll really come up as you handle each piece and part of it. And for most mineral right owners, it's not the only thing you do in your life. This is just a subset of something, an investment that you manage, an interest that you manage, and it can be overwhelming. So these are here to answer your specific questions. But again, if you're really looking for foundational knowledge, you should start with a course like yours, Matt. You really got to build that foundational knowledge. And if you're working with a property, going through a course that teaches you about mineral management step by step and using one of your properties as an example is a really good foundation to lay. A lot of these tools kind of go above and where you can find some more extra information or maybe an easier way to handle it.
Thanks for that. Yeah. And if you want to find out more, again, my course can be found at mineralrightspodcast.com, and then just click on the courses link. And you can learn more about that. And this is kind of the structure. The course does follow this, generally the outline of these steps in the process of managing your minerals and royalties, or learning about how to manage those. And that structure is really around, first of all, knowing what you own, right? The first step is to know what you own. And there's certain things that we'll talk about that will help you do that. The next step is to learn about the different types of oil and gas interests, or even you could maybe flip those in order and say that the most important thing is, before you go and start searching for the different types of documents, for the different types of records related to your property, it helps to have a slight idea about what you should be looking for. And that relates to the different types of oil and gas interests, and then the different documents related to each of those. The next step, of course, is once you've identified what you own, is to figure out how to locate that property on a map, and to figure out what kind of oil and gas activity, around drilling, they're producing wells on that property. And we'll talk about the tools you can use for that. And then finally, the most common question is, okay, I found out that I inherited this piece of property. What's it worth? Should I be looking at maybe selling it? Do I need to look at going after and contacting operators to let them know that I exist and that I'm the rightful owner of this property and I should be getting paid royalties because it's kind of in no man's land? And so we'll talk about all those things as well. But as far as that first step, Justin, I think let's talk about knowing what you own, and then we'll weave into that, learning about the oil and gas interests. But do you want to talk a little bit about your experience in when you first found out that your family had inherited minerals and royalties, and then that whole journey, and like what was helpful, what stumbling blocks did you get into, and ways to kind of get over those with the tools that you used?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I think knowing what you own is really, there's two parts to this question. You can be answering a very specific question about a certain property that you've been notified about. So, for instance, we hear a lot of mineral owners, a landman is contacting you, or you've received a check stub or found a check stub. And you know this, at least to some degree, some information about the property and that the property exists. There's going in and finding out the interest that you own for that property. And then there's another question, which is there other things that I may own that I might just not be aware of? Something people don't realize, but they often enjoy about this experience is the genealogical research. This has to do with the family heritage. It's typically, if it's inherited, it came from somebody in your family. And tools like Ancestry.com, family tree research strategies, archived newspapers was somewhere that I found a lot of success in finding about different properties they may have been related to. That kind of gives you an idea of where to go looking for records. Not necessarily the same question you're trying to answer when you know a legal description already, but there may be other properties you're unaware of. And then, Matt, let's say, okay, we see some activity in a certain area through the newspaper or through Ancestry, or we have a legal description. The first real milestone is to go do county research. So going and actually looking at those legal filings for the documents, county clerk websites, online portals. Some states have really good records. Texas is pretty great when it comes to deed records in most counties. There are other third-party services like Courthouse Direct, OK County Records, Texas File, and then also Inveris, which was formerly Drilling Info, also has a tool and a resource for this, Matt. But I would say this is the first little cycle, as you mentioned, of knowing what type of interest that you have that really can trip up mineral owners. You're going through these county records and looking for records, and then you got to figure out what type of record is that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, related to that, the county research and the genealogical research, a lot of times that's iterative. And I think that's what, you're alluding to there, that you find out, okay, what is this record that I'm looking at? Now I need to go understand the different types of oil and gas interests to be able to decipher these documents that I find in the county records that have my ancestors' names on them. It's an assignment document. Okay, what does that mean? Typically you'll learn after doing research that, that relates to the leasehold part of the interest, and that might relate to a non-operated working interest, depending on the language in that, or it might relate to an overriding royalty interest. And so those are things you'll learn. And I think there's probably some value in, just diving in, at least from my standpoint. I think we oftentimes get into analysis paralysis. It's like, I got to learn about everything related to oil and gas before I even go and start researching it. And I think people get hung up and they don't even get started. I think the big thing is to just start doing the work, start doing the research. You'll uncover questions that you need to answer related to documents you find, related to names that you find. And this episode hopefully will be a tool in your toolbox to help you go back and, so bookmark the show notes. We'll link to all these tools we're talking about today, so you don't have to worry about writing it all down. But, for sure, understand, okay, I'm in this step in the process. I'm going to go do genealogical research. What are some resources for looking for those archived newspapers? Ancestry.com is obviously the big one. And in my experience, it's interesting. And I don't know about you, Justin, when I have done genealogical research, so during COVID, we had a lot of free time on our hands, right? So we were doing a bunch of genealogical research. My wife was doing it for her side of for her family, and then I was doing it for mine. And my sister had a whole Ancestry.com account that she gave me the login information to. And so I was working with her to try to trace it back. And it's very similar to researching documents in the county records in terms of going back, each step up that chain or up that family tree, in this case, looking for those names. So, the names of your grandparents. So you would look for them and, in Ancestry.com, for example, and see who their parents were. And then from there, you can look and see who the parents were, your great grandparents and things like that. And it's just a similar process to searching for records in the county. You look for the name of your direct ancestor that you inherited these from. Maybe it's your mom or your dad. You look for their name, and then you find out who granted them the interest, if maybe it's their parents. And so then you search for their name and you find out who granted them the interest, and you kind of keep going back up that chain of title, which is kind of oftentimes parallels that family tree. So that's why we recommend, genealogical research as a tool in your toolbox as you're, learning about these, especially if you don't have that family history that was passed down to you. And hey, we own these interests here. Here's how we came to own them. It's just, you got that call out of the blue from a landman, or you're trying to understand what all might be out there. Looking at places where people lived is important and things like that. So that's a great tip, Justin. So how do you document this? Okay, let's say we're doing this process. We're in DI Courthouse, that Embarrass tool. We'll link to their website where you can get a free trial of that tool to use it. And that's really useful for interests in Texas primarily, and also parts of Southeast New Mexico and the Permian Basin. So let's say we're in Embarrass DI Courthouse. We're doing that kind of title research. We find that information in that Embarrass DI Courthouse. You can export it into a run sheet for you, like directly. But if you're using the county website, what is a run sheet, Justin? How do you use it? And sort of, let's talk about how you start to document this process and what you need to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Tools work differently depending on what tool you're using, as Matt said. But with creating a run sheet, you're basically going through and listing all the documents that are transferring ownership or maybe related to that ownership. And it gives you a comprehensive list of each transfer, what the interest was. And Matt, I know something that I struggled with in this stage was I became very much in the mindset of just keep everything. But not only did I keep everything, but I also went through the process of purchasing everything. And going back now, I think I would think about it differently in that I would absolutely keep everything that might be related to it. But a lot of these services charge per download of that document or per page. So it may be better to collect all these documents, understand what the ownerships are, like we talked about, and then go back and purchase the ones that you need. But that run sheet is integral to that because it's going to allow you to understand what of these documents are actually related and what just may be unrelated documents for that tract of land, or maybe before the ownership or after the ownership. And Matt, you have a wonderful template on your website that I use all the time for a run sheet. If you want to go in and create a spreadsheet of that. And it's just really a systematic approach to documenting those transfers. Again, we've mentioned this a ton through these couple sections, but understanding what type of interest you have is where it becomes really important in this process. And Matt, I know for myself, even now, I go back to your course. I'm going to take a look at your course, kind of follow it to go along to do this process. Because if you're starting out, you really don't even understand what it is you're looking for. So to have that resource you can access when you don't do it often really helps to say, okay, this is what I'm looking for. I forget. I don't necessarily need every single document.
Yeah, you don't need everything. I think that's a good point. The good thing is a lot of these websites will allow you to search for free. It's only when you go to view the document that you need to pay the money. And you absolutely need to download a copy of every instrument that is related to your chain of title specifically. So anything that mentions, your ancestors as a grantor or grantee related to a piece of property that you believe you own minerals, or that that you own minerals or royalties or working interests on. And sometimes it's not as clear cut as just looking for those names and they were the ones that signed the lease. It could be, especially if you inherited an overriding royalty interest, that it was someone else that owned the minerals and that originally leased them out. And then your ancestor got the interest as a part of, maybe they were a landman or geologist, as part of doing work for the oil company that was leasing. And so you would need to go and find those, original source oil and gas leases or assignments. And it may not be as simple as just looking for your ancestor's name. So again, that's where searching for everything. And then, sort of like playing Sherlock Holmes and kind of tracing back. And, I have a hint that, reading this document with my ancestor's name on it, they reference this other deed or this other assignment. I need to go and search by the book and page number for that specific instrument that they're referencing. And that'll oftentimes lead you down another trail that are, totally unrelated to your family tree, but is directly related to your interest and your ownership in those minerals or royalties. So that's an important tool. Is that run sheet. And like you said, I think that, it's initially, if you want to do the search and just write the stuff down in the run sheet, but then download the things you think you need, I would say, focus on mineral deeds, quitclaim deeds, warranty deeds, oil and gas leases, of course. And then for on the leasehold side of things, any oil and gas leases, assignment documents, any ratification documents, there's things like that, memorandum of lease. So there's these types of key instruments you'll be looking for that'll be the ones you need to focus on. Like if they owned other property in that county, let's say they owned a farm, but then they moved into the city, and that city they didn't own, that city tract they didn't own minerals, and they got a mortgage, and then they sold that house, and they and then they bought another one, and then they got a mortgage and they refinanced it. All those things are kind of noise and not really things you need to worry about. What you need to worry about is the things related to your tract. So as you learn about this stuff and you identify a tract, you may need to go switch to searching by the legal description. So that's another aspect of this, is not just by searching by your ancestors' names, but searching by the legal description is another way to dig deeper. And so that's definitely helpful. And then from other tools that I always go to is as you're researching back in time, you also need to go all the way back to the beginning and research going forward and kind of where those meet. Give you the complete picture. The tool that I use for researching any sort of patents, from the government to your ancestor to a person, the BLM, the GLO website, General Land Office, I think is what it stands for. And they have a search that you can do by legal description, and it'll allow you to download the patent, download the original plat, a survey plat when they surveyed that section or that township. So super helpful as well. As far as maybe flipping the script, Justin, and moving forward into learning about different types of oil and gas interests, what are some of the tools that you found to be helpful in that area to learn about, kind of what do I need to look for, period?
Yeah. And, I think what becomes so challenging about this, Matt, and how a lot of us meet each other the first time is the different scenarios that can occur. So now you have an idea of that there's a property that could be out there. There's several different options. There's forks in the road here. It could be that the property was in pay status for your ancestors. So it's just a matter of working with the operator. Providing them what they need, they're going to transfer that over or do a transfer of ownership. However, it could be that you see there's activity on this property, you believe you have ownership, and you're not getting paid. So what then and why not? So that's another way that it can come through. And Matt, one of the most valuable things in this is people to talk to. And having those experts that you can just ask questions to, others that have been through these experiences and seen the different scenarios, is hugely valuable. Matt, you and I both are part of the National Association of Royalty Owners. And I would say that's the number one value we hear from folks is meeting other people that have been through some of these situations. They're a resource that you can ask questions to, and people know other people. These are typically state-based or region-based. They have chapters that you could be a part of, educational events. They do annual conventions, networking where you can meet others that are in your situation, and then a certified mineral manager program. So that's something that if you're managing several properties and you want to become certified or feel more confident in your abilities, that's a certification that you can study for and receive. And then also other membership benefits. The organization is putting a lot of focus on bringing in vendors that provide services to mineral rights owners, and you get some benefit and discounts through that facet.
Yeah, and then the endless library that's ever growing of webinars on different topics. So if you need to learn about a specific thing, then you can go back and look at that library of webinars, watch that webinar, and kind of figure out what to do. And that's kind of a great resource as well. You mentioned the experts and having people that you can lean on for specific help. And I think, what we mentioned earlier around being able to perform a title search and to research your interest to know what you own, that's called performing a title search. A professional that does that for a living around mineral title is called a landman, and that can be both a man or a woman. It's just the title is a landman. And of course, the TV show with Billy Bob Thornton shows one perspective of the world of a landman. But you can actually hire these people. They are professional. They're experts in running title. The typical day rate, ranges based on experience. I'd say an average kind of beginning starting point is around $600 a day. And those people can go to the county. And this is particularly helpful if your county records are not available online. And so if it's, they're behind the times, they haven't digitized their records, you actually need to go to the courthouse to research things. And so that's where hiring a landman in that area to physically go to the courthouse, make copies of documents that are related to your interests. And you can get a limited title search on a property, and it's, maybe a week's worth of time for them. So say on order of around $3,000, depending on the complexity. So that's like the entry level base, limited title search on one tract that's relatively straightforward. But then you can get copies of all those instruments. You can get a run sheet that's a professional has put together. And so that can be a great way to get a feel for, okay, here's what I own. I'm fairly confident now in knowing that I own X number of net acres in this tract. And that'll help you going forward as you negotiate leases, as you confirm your decimal interest in wells. You'll know, okay, I know what my net interest is. I know that I have this tract out there, but I know I've had somebody do the math and trace it back over time to figure out what my fraction is. So that can be very helpful. And then, like Justin said, that Narrow, we have a supporter directory. So these are vetted companies that have chosen to support Narrow through, showing up at our conventions and advertising and supporting the organization. And so you can see, if you need a mineral manager, if you need an appraisal, or if you need a landman, here's a list of people that you can go and contact. So that's a great member benefit of becoming a member of Narrow. An introductory membership is only $75 a year, and you easily pay that back with just a couple of webinars or attending one event, or even looking at some of the other discounts we get on products and services. So definitely check that out. And I would say the other aspect of this is, as far as learning about how to find a landman in that area. So let's say it's a very specific niche area that's not like in the middle of the Permian Basin where there's a ton of different options for finding people. You can search the American Association of Professional Landmen database. There's a public facing search. You can find out if somebody is a member, and then if they're a RPL or a CPL, so it's a registered professional landman or certified professional landman, and that will designate, or that'll tell you whether or not that person abides by a certain code of ethics that the American Association of Professional Landmen has, and that they have gone through the certification, they're experienced, and so forth. So if you're looking for an independent landman to hire to go run title, that's a great resource. And you can become a member of the AAPL as an associate member, I believe. So you don't have to be a landman to become a member, but by becoming a member, you get access to their directory. You can see the local, if you're in the area where your minerals are located, they have local chapters that have meetings, and you can see who the people are that are involved with that and reach out to them to get help. So that's a great tool as well. And then, of course, this podcast, is a great resource. We have tons of free episodes. So we're approaching our 300th episode. But if you look, and you can search the website, mineralrightspodcast.com, for whatever topic you're looking for. We have free information out there. Also, my YouTube channel, just search for Matt Sands Mineral Rights. And I have videos on how to use the majority of the oil producing state oil and gas commission websites. So to figure out how to locate your property on a map and figure out what wells are producing, what important documents related to those wells, and how to download them. I have Justin and I recorded how-to videos on that. And then, of course, another resource is Mineral Rights Forum community, which is a free community. You can go and ask questions. You take it with a grain of salt. You'll get probably you ask a question and get 4 different answers, and so sometimes it's not always super clear. If somebody, if you know what kind of background or experience they have and kind of where they're coming from, but it can be a good way to get started in the right direction. And then one of our, a friend of the show, Tim Powell, who's been on the show before, he has a podcast called the Minerals and Royalties Podcast, and it's really tailored towards the institutional side of things. So the mineral buyers, industry perspective. So they talk a lot about, buying and selling and the different deals that different companies have done and things like that. But if you want to get a sense for the sentiment in the industry around, they bullish right now on oil versus gas, what basins are they interested in, that can help you just get a feel for the overall market. And so that's a great tool as well. Justin, where else did you go to learn about kind of the oil and gas side of things when you found out that your family owned these types of interests?
There's a ton of academic resources, Matt, and industry information that is out there. There's university sources that put out information regularly, state regulatory websites. There's industry publications like HART, RBL Energy Newsletter, Doomberg. Those are great ways to keep up with kind of what's going on. And then there's also the structured learning options. So we mentioned the Certified Mineral Management's course, Matt, your Mineral Management Basics course. And then it's really a good idea to get into some kind of systematic approach to education. And I would say education is really two parts. There's the foundation when you're really learning about this, which is what we're talking about. And then there's the leading edge education. So once you have an understanding of the basics, there's what's changing, what ownerships might be coming. We've talked a lot lately about the rise of lithium and how you might need to change your strategy in your deeds and documents and leases to ensure that you reserve the right to that. So that's a good example of like leading edge. But Matt, it really gets into the systems you like to use. And then there's two different things that I think you see a lot. So we've talked a lot about some of the county systems, which are official records and official websites for doing this research. And then there's other third-party software, which we're going to talk more about some of those that offer some additional features, make it easier to see whatever it is. But typically this data is coming from the state sanctioned data or the data from these official bureaus for the states.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of that, so let's say, okay, we've done the research. We know a base level of understanding about the different types of oil and gas interests. We've done some title research. We know where our property is located. Now, what's next? So we have to go and find out where it is on a map and then see, are there oil and gas wells that are producing or that have produced in the past? And, are there potentially new permits or new wells that are coming up? And just understanding the general landscape around the oil and gas activity in the area where you own minerals. And so in order to be able to find a piece of property on a map, you have to understand how to read a legal description. Again, we talk about that in the podcast, which is sometimes a picture says 1,000 words. And so again, in the course, we go through more detail, and really you can look at my YouTube channel for a free view of how to decipher this and how to do that kind of searching by legal description on a map. And so that's a great place to start. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the BLM, the GLO search tool to get the original survey plat for that township. So you can see, okay, here, if my legal description reference is lot 1, 2, and 3. What does that mean? That's not what I'm used to seeing in this, in the PLSS, that survey system that is used around across most of the country that talks about township, section, and range. And then within the section, an aliquot part, which is basically just the breakdown of, okay, it's the northwest quarter of that section, or the northwest, or whatever. Sometimes it'll refer to a lot, and you have to go to the original surveyed plat to figure out the lot location and then the number of acres in that lot. And that'll help you determine the net acreage, right? If you have a undivided 1/2 interest in the minerals in, a certain parcel, and it's described by various lots, well, you have to go and find out how many acres each of those lots represent in order to figure out 1/2 of the total acreage will tell you how many net mineral acres you own. So that's important to understand the full picture of the legal description. Once you've got that, now you want to go research your state oil and gas activity. And again, like Justin mentioned, you can do that with the various videos that we've recorded on the different state websites. Another tool that I use extensively in my consulting practice, doing appraisals for clients and helping people research property, is welldatabase.com. I use the premium plan, but if you're just getting started, they have a free plan that you can use, and that allows you to view production data and basic information about wells all across the entire country. So it's not just limited to one state. So if you own interest across multiple states, that's a great resource. Once you're in pay status, or once you're getting paid royalties, you'll get revenue statement or check stub. And most of those come through a system called Energy Link, which is another Enverus platform. They have a tool for mineral owners called Mineral IQ. They have a free version that's kind of linked up to Energy Link. So the wells you're getting paid through Energy Link, you can go and it'll automatically bring them up, show them on a map, give you basic information about those. And they have a paid plan that you can get, which is fairly reasonably priced, targeted towards mineral and royalty owners. It'll give you some more basic information, allow you to run some reports, to download the data into an Excel file, for example, to do a basic valuation of producing wells It won't do that for any undeveloped acreage or non-producing stuff, any permits and things like that. But it'll give you a basic feel for, okay, my existing wells, what's the future look like from a cash flow perspective? And then, again, it'll give you triggers on monitoring activity. So I think that's the big thing here is once you identify it on the map, you want to know when a rig shows up or when a well gets permitted. And each of these mineral management softwares have some sort of, kind of automatic monitoring they'll do, and they'll give you a notification if there's a rig that shows up or if a new permit is filed within a 2-mile radius or these types of parameters. Mineral IQ includes that. There's also more powerful but more expensive platforms called MineralSoft is one, and another one is MineralWare. Those are very powerful tools. They go a little bit more in depth in the accounting and sort of the proactive stuff like, hey, my well reported production to the state, but that well did not show up on my latest royalty check. I need to go and figure out why that happened. So those are some really good tools as well. Justin, what other things have you found to be helpful in that area of kind of monitoring activity, looking at what operators are doing, things like that?
I think having a routine of going through and checking your properties, if you have multiple properties, is really the number one thing. And like we mentioned, Matt, much of this data comes from the state data tools. And though many of them are really, really fantastic, it's good to be in a practice of going back and actually checking those official sources and GIS mapping services for those states to check it out. If you're curious of what might be coming for the next year, public investor presentations for, let's say, an Occidental, different companies can tell you a lot about what their plans are going to be for coming years. And then any changes of ownership. So, Matt, it's not uncommon in the oil and gas industry from, Shell to sell assets to Occidental, Occidental to sell assets to Shell. You can set up different Google alerts. So, Matt, for instance, my properties are in the Permian Basin, so I'm very interested in what happens there in certain areas, and setting up a Google alert to receive news stories that might pertain to that, and just kind of keeping your thumb on what's coming. For people in the Permian Basin, gas prices is a big concern because a lot of the wells produce a lot of gas. So that's something I might keep up with, where other places like in Utah, they're more focused on just the crude oil production.
Yeah, that's a great point. Now, so the next step, okay, so we know the different types of oil and gas interests. We have a general idea of knowing what we own based on doing some title research. We've been able to locate it on a map, and now we see some oil and gas activity. Maybe there's producing wells that we need to go and identify who the operator is in order to get into pay status. And maybe we want to know, okay, so I'm getting paid royalties. Maybe it's $500 a month for all my wells. What is this worth? If I got this purchase offer in the mail, is this reasonable? Is this a fair offer? That's oftentimes where people will come to me to get an evaluation. Is, hey, I got this offer. I'm kind of thinking about selling. I want to know before I do that. I want to be informed about what I should be negotiating for or whatever. So that's oftentimes a trigger will be if there's activity on your minerals around new permits specifically. That's what will trigger a flurry of purchase offers coming in, because mineral buyers are looking for properties where there's line of sight to future development that hasn't happened yet. And they can hopefully get the property at a slight discount, and then they get a very quick return on investment, because once those new wells are drilled and start paying royalties, and that's when they start to earn, to make their money back. And so that is the most desirable type of property is, sometimes properties that are either have a few existing wells with a bunch of permits on them, or even wells, maybe no producing wells, but they have permits that are going to be drilled or maybe in the process of being drilled. Those are very valuable. Now, getting an idea of what your property is worth, the only way to properly do that is to have a professional do an evaluation, and that would be looking at the oil and gas reserves under the ground for any producing wells, as well as any non-producing or what they call proved undeveloped reserves, and then even potentially some other more speculative reserves categories. But you can get a complete picture then of, okay, here's the oil and gas potential of my property. Here's the number, on today's market and with the line of sight to current development, or maybe no line of sight, what that looks like. If I were to sell, here's what I could potentially get for it, or maybe what I'd be giving up in terms of future royalties. And so that's important to have that complete picture so you can make an informed decision. Now, there is one way you can do a very basic estimation, and keep in mind, this will only get you an approximation. It's not a definite number. Of course, all of this is subjective because nobody knows what future commodity prices will do around, price of oil or price of natural gas. But one rule of thumb, if you have wells that are fairly old and established wells, so I'd say over 4 to 5 years old, whether they're conventional well, vertical well that were drilled, maybe it was drilled 25 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago, or if it's a more recent horizontal well that was drilled greater than, say 5 years ago. So it's on that kind of terminal decline or at the more flat part of the curve as that well is declining in production each month. It's sort of tapered off and is fairly flat. You can use a multiple of around 50 to 60 times your average monthly cash flow to estimate the value of the producing reserves associated with your minerals or royalties. Keep in mind that certain types of interest are more valuable than others. If you have an overriding royalty interest that's held by, let's say, one older vertical well, there's a chance that that could get washed out. If that vertical well gets plugged and abandoned before any new wells get drilled, your override goes away when that oil and gas lease expires. So that's going to have less value than if you had an interest in the underlying mineral rights that are perpetual in nature. In other words, whether or not a well exists there, you have ownership of them. And in some cases have dormant mineral statutes. So you need to look at that and make sure you're doing the things you need to do to protect those interests if you're in a state that has dormant mineral statutes. But in general, minerals are a little bit, for all things being equal, in that scenario I gave, would be a little bit more valuable because you'd still maintain ownership even after production ceases on that existing well. So there's different range there. The other thing you have to keep in mind is what do you think future commodity prices are going to be relative to today? So if you're basing that 50 to 60 times average monthly cash flow on today's prices, prices $80 per barrel when you do that calculation. But, realistically, anyone that's underwriting this, from a mineral buyer perspective or from a reserves perspective is going to use the latest bank price deck or the NYMEX futures prices for that commodity to figure out what the property's worth. And that might be $65 a barrel. Well, you need to adjust, right, that future value based on the expectation what future prices are going to be. So, for example, you'd want to do that comparison. If you think it's going to be $65 divided by $80 today, that would give you the factor you need to multiply that resulting value by in order to approximate what it should be based on that different commodity price. So there's a lot of little nuance here, but that's one tool that anybody can use, keeping in mind, again, this is not give you fair market value. It's not something you can use for like an IRS appraisal to say, hey, this is what my property is definitively worth. There's a lot that goes into that. And, certainly it would be potentially not defensible in that scenario. So you'd want to get professional help if you needed something for legal or tax purposes. But rough rule of thumb, hey, I'm getting these offers. What are my existing royalties worth? Now, the thing you keep in mind is that will not give you any value for any undeveloped interest. So if you have one vertical well that's producing, but then 10 horizontal wells are permitted, that's going to grossly undervalue your minerals. And so if you were to say, oh, well, the offer I'm getting is way above that 50 times my my monthly check, I'm going to sell, hold on, put the brakes on. You need to get professional help and get somebody to look at the undeveloped reserves and figure out what the value is there, because that's going to be the majority of the value in that scenario I just mentioned. What about comparable sales, Justin? Where are some of the platforms or where places can we go to find information about what people are selling these types of interests for? Because that's definitely another data point we should know about.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's a great way to kind of judge what you might be looking at when you have a property. Matt, this is part of your process when you're doing an official evaluation. So there are other marketplaces that you can check, such as EnergyNet, Mid-Continent Energy Exchange, U.S. Mineral Exchange, and others, where you can see, what these interests might be going for. Some of these might be much larger interests, much smaller interests. So it's really important to understand what it is you actually own to compare apples with apples here. And then some counties, depending on where you are, you could do county records research for recent sales of properties to see if you can find information about those sales and what the rates were. And Matt, that's a great way to judge it. I think increasingly people have interests that maybe aren't large enough to really justify the multiple thousands of dollars that goes into official evaluations or hiring attorneys. And that all goes into considering this. And a way to kind of get a benchmark would be checking out these seller platforms and what other interests are going for.
Yeah, that can be a useful tool. Like you mentioned, I think the other thing with those county records, Oklahoma is great because for mineral transactions, you have to file a documentary stamp fee based on the sales price of the property. And if the deed mentions the number of net acres that are included in the sale, you can use that to figure out the dollar per net mineral acre for that property, or the dollar per net royalty acre for that property, and then use that to figure out, okay, I have that number, I own 10 net acres. I'm going to multiply the dollar per net mineral acre value by my 10 net acres, and I get the approximate value. Again, you have to know the characteristics of that property that you're looking at on that comparable sale, that deed. Just like when you do an appraisal for a home, every property is not the same. They may have leased those minerals at a different royalty rate, and if you're looking at it on a dollar per net mineral acre basis, it could be too high or too low for your particular case. Or they might have new permits on the property and you don't, and even though you're a couple of miles away, that's going to be a significant difference in value between those two properties. So you got to know what you're looking for in terms of, hey, this property is equivalent to something that I own, and I can adjust for those different factors, and then get a feel. But that is something that is available and is useful to look for. Of course, my company, Silver Hills Investments and Consulting, we do mineral appraisals. So getting help from a professional. Other appraisers, we have a list of those in the narrow supporter directory, of the different companies, including myself, that are supporters of narrow. And you can see the other options out there. If you have properties in a particular geographic area, sometimes appraisers or engineers will specify what areas they work in and things like that. And then, I think when you want to understand, I think the ultimate goal with understanding what your property is worth is knowing the current production, which again, you can use that rule of thumb for the multiple of cash flow. For the undeveloped potential, ideally, or the most robust way to do that is to do a discounted cash flow analysis, again, going through and looking at the reserves, oil and gas potential of that area, timing of future wells, and then all of that added up will give you the net present value of that property. But you can get a rough idea of the untapped potential if there is oil and gas leasing going on. So I'd say like a bare minimum, you have an area that there's been some active leasing. Maybe there's not a ton of wells being drilled. There is some undeveloped potential there that you can approximate the value, kind of worst case scenario, over the life of those interests for one owner. They might lease it 2.5 to 3 times is kind of a rule of thumb. So if you know the lease bonus rate from a recent lease that you've signed, or a recent lease that your ancestors signed a few years ago, that'll give you an idea of a rough approximation of value. Again, it could be way off depending on how long ago it was, whether it was there horizontal drilling going on or not, those types of things. But yeah, multiplying that lease bonus amount by 2.5 to 3 times can give you a rough approximation for the undeveloped. So if nothing else, that'll give you a floor. Now, the other thing you can take into account are the offers you get. So as you're getting multiple offers from different buyers, you'll see a range of different prices. And a lot of times they'll sort of converge on kind of a range of value that they're willing to offer you. Know that the value is going to be higher. The fair market value of your property is likely going to be higher than what you're getting in those unsolicited offers, because those like a first a first offer, right? This is a negotiation. They're going to leave room so they can go up and try to hopefully do a deal. And so it can be a useful tool for at least the minimum value, but I would not use that as the basis for, hey, that's a fair market value. That's what I'm going to sell my property for. I got 3 different offers at $5,000 per net royalty acre. You really need to do some more research and actually run the numbers to get a true idea, but that'll give you a rough like floor price. And then finally, just a couple of things. If you do look at wanting to sell, I think it's helpful to get help from somebody that has the connections in the industry that can help you market that properly to reputable end buyers so that you're dealing with somebody that can actually close the deal. They're not actually looking to just flip it to somebody else. They're good for the money. They're large private equity backed mineral funds and those types of end buyers are going to hold on to those interests for several years. So that's always a consideration too. Justin, beyond all what we've talked about so far, I think just before we wrap up, what are some other kind of ongoing mineral management or financial tools that you found helpful and sort of ways, places that you go for help, whether that's other advisors or different software programs or websites?
So one thing to mention in this, and this is as you're learning about it and with ongoing as well, use common sense with this. If you have a property and you're receiving a slew of letters coming in offering to purchase it, it's a good indicator that you need to look at it. You need to look closely. If other companies are expending money to find you, to contact you, it's something to consider. If you're trying to sell a property and you're having to go find somebody that might be interested in this property, then it could be a scenario where there's existing production. However, there may not be more production coming. And if you're getting a lot of letters, it's a good sign that maybe something's coming and other people see opportunity in this as well. And when those come in, a good way to get a grip on this, having a good CPA with oil and gas experience, Matt, is hugely important. And this is for both evaluating properties, inheriting properties, and then just the yearly tax filings. We hear from many mineral owners that they pay too much in taxes on their oil and gas because their CPA wasn't aware of what deductions might be available to them. Another important thing with this is keeping it separate from an accounting perspective. Your CPA is going to need to know what is mineral income. They're going to need to know how to report that for you on your tax returns. And a CPA that has dealt with that before can be really useful. And it's just a matter of asking them, what do you know about oil and gas experience? And as a mineral owner, you should educate yourself on that a little bit as well. Another thing, Matt, is a good oil and gas attorney. So as you do change of ownerships, that's something that's going to come up, and a good oil and gas attorney is worth their weight in gold. Typically, I would say out of all of the niches to find, a CPA with oil and gas experience can be a little tougher. Typically, oil and gas attorneys are pretty open and forward that is an area of expertise for them. They may also do commercial property law, so that's something to look for. They can help guide you on if you should do a trust or an LLC or how to structure those properties, where to put those properties, where to deed those properties to. They also will prepare the deeds for you. Having your title research done can be a huge asset to an attorney. So if that's something you keep and you do a good job of keeping, it can really help your attorney. Otherwise, they may need to go contact a landman to be confident in the deed that they're putting together. And then, Matt, as people age with mineral rights, I think the number one point of confusion is the transferring of ownership over the generations. It's something we just forget to mention. And each generation can be confused and have to relearn all of this critical information. And there's a couple of things you can do to help with that. One is educate the next generation. And two is work with an estate attorney that has oil and gas experience. And not all are made equal, Matt. I've had personally an attorney tell me that minerals weren't part of an estate. And not every estate attorney really knows minerals and oil and gas rights. And that's something you should really look for as you age and as you plan so the next generations have what they need.
Yeah, those are some great tips. And, as you go through and you're, keeping track of the royalties that come in, the expenses that you incur, and that's where a good CPA comes in handy, like Justin mentioned, because they can tell you what deductions you should be taking as far as any producing royalties. You have the percent depletion deduction or the cost depletion deduction. We have several episodes on that topic. We'll link to in the show notes. But that's something that's important. And then, you may be able to, depending on your particular circumstances, you may be able to expense certain items that you incur, some costs that you incur related to the management of your minerals and royalties, and that can be used to offset some of that income. So definitely get with your CPA to figure that all out. And then, the accounting software, I use Wave for my business. QuickBooks is another common, tool. Both of those have web-based options that you can access anywhere. There are also tools like POP's royalty software, which is if you don't like to have your data in the cloud, you want to have a standalone version on your computer. That's what they make, and you can own the license and own that software rather than have to pay a monthly subscription. So we'll link to those in the show notes as well. But yeah, I think ultimately knowing that you don't have to know everything, right? So these tools are out there to help you in your journey when you need them, and don't need to know about how to do all of this all at once. It comes step by step, maybe over the course of months or years, you'll be learning about these things. And as you have a particular need, that's when you can dive down the rabbit hole and figure out, okay, what accounting software do I need to be using? Because now I'm starting to I have a lease bonus payment, or maybe we just set up a trust or an LLC. And so we need to have a separate bank account. And so all of those things are, things you can worry about when you need to. Just know that we're here to help support you, as you go on your journey. And again, knowing what you own is so important. And then learning about the different types of oil and gas interest, learning how to research your property to figure out the potential. And then, one last tool I mentioned that is fairly common for new royalty owners, and they'll find some money usually here, is by searching the missingmoney.com website. And that's the Association of Comptrollers across the country. So all the different states that, royalty payments have been escheated to the state, or any other types of payments or assets that were not able to be paid to the owner, are escheated to the state or handed over to the state where they live, generally, for them to administer. And so you can search those across the country on that missingmoney.com website and find out if your ancestors had, maybe after they passed away, the operator kept trying to pay them royalties, and that check was returned, and they just finally handed it over to the state. You may have some money out there that you can go and claim. So that's always a great tool as well, and a nice surprise if you find anything out there. So hopefully this is helpful. Again, links to all this information in the show notes. Bookmark that page. You can go back and use it as a resource. And we also have a resources page on the Mineral Rights Podcast website that has links to other tools, and like some of these that we talked about today. So hopefully this is helpful. And thanks again. And thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks so much for listening to the Mineral Rights Podcast with your host, Matt Sands. Don't forget to subscribe and share at mineralrightspodcast.com. The Mineral Rights Podcast should not be construed as investment, legal, or tax advice. All information is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy.